My in-laws tried to steal my son's passport to take custody until they forgot one little detail. I never expected my life to become a battlefield, and I certainly never expected that the people trying to destroy me would be the grandparents of my own child. My name is Maya. I am a 32-year-old single mother living in a quiet coastal town in Oregon, and for the past 3 years, my entire world has revolved around my 6-year-old son, Leo. Leo is a bright, energetic boy with a heart of gold, but his life started with a massive shadow. His father, Julian, walked out on us when Leo was just 3 years old, choosing to pursue a completely different life overseas and leaving me to pick up the pieces of our shattered family. I didn't have time to sit around and cry. I had a toddler to feed, a mortgage to pay, and a life to rebuild from scratch. I poured every single ounce of my energy into my career as a senior architectural draftswoman, working long, grueling hours during the day, and coming home to be the most present, loving mother I could possibly be at night. It wasn't an easy life, but it was our life, and we were incredibly happy. We had our own little routines, our weekend trips to the beach, and a home filled with genuine laughter. But there was a constant, toxic storm that refused to leave us alone. And that storm was Julian's parents, Richard and Eleanor. From the very moment Julian left, his parents didn't offer me comfort or support. Instead, they weaponized their grief and anger, turning it entirely against me. Eleanor was a cold, deeply manipulative woman who believed that her son could do absolute wrong, which meant that Julian's departure was somehow entirely my fault. She constantly dropped hints that if I had been a more submissive, traditional housewife, instead of focusing on my architectural career, Julian would have never felt the need to escape. Richard, a retired local magistrate, backed his wife up with a terrifying, cold authority. They didn't want to help me raise Leo. They wanted to control how Leo was raised. Every single weekend when they came to visit, Eleanor would inspect my house with a judgmental eye, running her fingers along the shelves looking for dust, checking my refrigerator to criticize the pre-made meals I bought during busy work weeks, and openly telling Leo that his mother worked too much. They would sit in my living room and make passive-aggressive comments right in front of my son, saying things like, "It's such a shame your mother prioritizes her office over making you fresh cookies every afternoon." I tolerated their psychological warfare for 3 long years solely because I wanted Leo to have a relationship with his grandparents. I wanted him to feel connected to his father's side of the family, foolishly believing that deep down, Richard and Eleanor truly loved him. I didn't realize that their love was actually an obsession with ownership. The situation escalated dramatically when I received a massive promotion at my firm. It was a dream come true, a position as a lead project director that came with a significant raise, ensuring that Leo's financial future would be completely secure. The only downside was that for the first 2 months, I would need to stay late at the office on Tuesday and Thursday evenings to oversee a major commercial development project downtown. Knowing that hiring a random babysitter would open me up to a barrage of criticism from my in-laws, I swallowed my pride and called Eleanor. I asked her if she and Richard would be willing to watch Leo at my house on those 2 evenings for just a few weeks. Eleanor's voice on the phone was unnervingly sweet. She told me that they would be absolutely delighted to help, claiming that they just wanted what was best for their precious grandson. I felt a massive wave of relief wash over me, thinking that perhaps this was a turning point in our relationship, a chance to finally build a peaceful bridge. But my relief was incredibly short-lived. On the very first Tuesday evening of the new schedule, I came home around 8 o'clock, exhausted but happy, holding a small toy I had bought for Leo as a reward for being a good boy. When I walked through the front door, the atmosphere inside the house was thick with tension. Leo was already asleep in his bedroom, but Richard and Eleanor were sitting rigidly on my living room sofa, their faces grim and solemn. Before I could even set my laptop bag down, Eleanor stood up, crossed her arms, and looked at me with an expression of pure disgust. She told me that they had spent the last 4 hours trying to manage a completely chaotic house. She claimed that Leo had thrown a massive tantrum because I wasn't there to tuck him in, and that his behavior was a direct result of my severe emotional neglect. Richard chimed in with his booming courtroom voice, stating that a child needs consistency, not a mother who leaves him with others while she pursues her corporate vanity. I was completely stunned. Leo had never thrown wild tantrums with me, and he had been genuinely excited about spending time with his grandparents. I apologized profusely, explaining that the transition was just temporary, but Eleanor just scoffed, whispering that some women simply aren't cut out for motherhood. The nightmare truly turned malicious 2 weeks later. I was planning a special 2-week vacation for Leo and me to visit my sister in Canada during his summer school break. It was going to be his very first international trip, and he was incredibly excited about getting a stamp in his blue passport. I had kept Leo's passport, along with his birth certificate and my medical records, inside a secure labeled plastic organizer folder on the top shelf of my home office closet. On a Thursday afternoon, while Richard and Eleanor were at my house watching Leo, I received a frantic phone call from Eleanor. She was screaming into the receiver, her voice filled with a calculated panic. She told me that I needed to come home immediately because she had discovered something absolutely horrifying. My heart stopped. I dropped everything at my desk, told my boss it was a family emergency, and drove like a maniac back to my neighborhood, my mind racing with terrifying images of Leo being severely injured. When I burst through the front door, panting and terrified, I found Leo sitting at the kitchen table, looking completely confused and holding a coloring book. He was physically fine, but standing in the center of the living room were Richard, Eleanor, and to my absolute horror, a local Child Protective Services caseworker named Brenda, whom Richard knew personally through his old legal connections. Eleanor turned to me, her eyes shining with malicious triumph, and announced that they had called an emergency intervention because I was a completely unfit, reckless mother. She claimed that while she was looking for a spare coloring book in my office closet, she discovered that Leo's vital identification documents, including his passport and birth certificate, were completely missing. She accused me of losing my own child's legal identity due to my chaotic, unorganized lifestyle. Richard stepped forward, holding a legal document, and calmly informed me that they were officially filing an emergency petition for temporary custody of Leo. He stated that because I was unable to maintain a safe, organized environment, and because I had lost critical federal documents, they were taking Leo to their house that very evening for his own protection until a formal family court hearing could be arranged. I felt like the ground was collapsing beneath my feet. I sprinted to my home office, tore open the closet door, and reached for the top shelf. The plastic organizer folder was gone. I searched frantically through every single drawer, dumping papers onto the floor, my hands shaking so violently I could barely breathe. It was an absolute nightmare. I knew with absolute certainty that I had placed that folder on the top shelf just 3 days ago. I ran back into the living room, tears streaming down my face, begging the caseworker to listen to me. I told Brenda that I was an organized professional, that I never lost important documents, and that my in-laws were deliberately trying to steal my son. But Eleanor just shook her head pityingly, telling the caseworker that this emotional instability was exactly what they dealt with every single day. Richard looked at Brenda and said that as a former magistrate, he could assure her that my house was an unstable environment for a young boy. Brenda looked at me with a professional, cold detachment, stating that until the missing identification documents were located and a safety assessment was completed, it would be best for Leo to stay with his grandparents temporarily to avoid further family chaos. They were actually going to take my son. Eleanor walked toward Leo's bedroom to pack his small duffel bag, a smug, satisfied smirk playing on her lips as she passed me in the hallway. In that exact moment of absolute despair, a cold, sharp spark of clarity suddenly flashed through my panic. I stopped crying. My breathing slowed down. I remembered a crucial detail that Richard and Eleanor had completely forgotten about. 2 months ago, when I first started working late, I had grown incredibly anxious about leaving my house unattended with people coming and going. To ensure Leo's absolute safety, I had hired a professional security company to install high-definition, microscopic nanny cameras disguised as ordinary smoke detectors and digital wall clocks in the living room, the kitchen, and my private home office. I had completely forgotten to mention it to my in-laws, and because the cameras were virtually invisible, they had no idea they were being monitored. The footage was automatically saved to a secure cloud-based application on my smartphone. I pulled my phone out of my pocket, my fingers moving with a cold, deliberate precision. I opened the security app, selected my home office camera feed from Tuesday afternoon, and began fast-forwarding through the footage. Within less than 2 minutes of searching, I found exactly what I was looking for. The video quality was crystal clear, capturing everything in sharp, high-definition detail. The footage showed Eleanor walking into my home office while Leo was watching cartoons downstairs. She didn't look for a coloring book. She walked directly to my closet, stood on her tiptoes, pulled down my plastic organizer folder, opened it, and confirmed that Leo's passport and birth certificate were inside. Then, she stuffed the entire folder into her large, designer leather handbag, zipped it shut, and walked out of the room with a cold smile. I locked my phone screen, took a deep, steadying breath, and walked into the living room where Richard was confidently explaining to the caseworker how they planned to enroll Leo into a private academy near their estate. I stood in front of them, my voice completely devoid of any fear or weakness. I looked at Brenda, the caseworker, and asked her to please sit down on the sofa because I had just located the missing documents. Eleanor walked back into the room, holding Leo's packed duffel bag, and sneered, saying that lies wouldn't save me now. I looked directly at Eleanor and said that she was absolutely right. Lies wouldn't save anyone anymore. I activated the screen mirroring feature on my phone, casting my device directly onto the massive 60-inch smart television mounted on my living room wall. I pressed play. The video of Eleanor entering my private office, stealing the federal documents, and hiding them in her designer bag played out in massive, undeniable detail for everyone in the room to see. The silence that fell over the living room was so heavy you could hear the steady ticking of the kitchen clock. Eleanor's face instantly transformed from a smug expression of triumph into a grotesque mask of sheer, unadulterated horror. She dropped Leo's duffel bag onto the hardwood floor, her hands trembling as she stared at her own criminal actions broadcasting on the large screen. Richard's eyes widened in complete shock, his mouth opening slightly as his legal authority completely disintegrated in front of a state official. Brenda, the caseworker, stood up slowly, her professional demeanor shifting into absolute anger as she looked from the television screen straight at Eleanor's designer handbag sitting on the entryway table. Brenda walked over to the table, picked up Eleanor's bag, and demanded that she open it immediately. Eleanor stammered, trying to claim that the video was a deep fake, an AI manipulation meant to ruin her reputation. But Richard knew the law, and he knew they were utterly ruined. With a pale, defeated face, Richard reached into his wife's bag, pulled out my plastic organizer folder, and handed it directly to the caseworker. Brenda checked the contents, confirmed that Leo's passport and birth certificate were safely inside, and then turned to Richard and Eleanor with a cold, lethal glare. She informed them that fabricating a child neglect report and stealing federal identification documents to manipulate a state agency was a severe criminal offense. She looked at me, apologized profusely for the distress caused, and stated that Child Protective Services would be filing an immediate report against Richard and Eleanor for malicious harassment and attempted fraud. I walked over to my son, took him by the hand, and led him gently into his bedroom, telling him that Mommy and his grandparents just had a grown-up misunderstanding and that he should play with his blocks for a few minutes. When I walked back into the living room, Brenda was already leaving to file the official paperwork. Richard and Eleanor were standing near the front door, looking smaller and more pathetic than I had ever seen them. Richard tried to step toward me, his voice trembling as he begged me not to press formal charges, claiming that they only did it because they missed their son and wanted to keep the family legacy alive through Leo. I looked at both of them, feeling absolutely zero pity, zero anger, and zero connection. I told them that they had officially crossed a line from which there was absolutely no return. I informed them that my lawyer would be filing a permanent lifetime restraining order against both of them first thing in the morning, and that if they ever stepped foot on my property, called my phone, or went near my son's school again, I would personally ensure that Richard's former legal colleagues saw every single second of my hidden camera footage from a witness stand. I opened my front door wide and told them to get out of my house and out of our lives forever. Eleanor began to sob hysterically as Richard pulled her out onto the porch, the heavy wooden door slamming shut behind them with a definitive, thunderous click. I leaned against the closed door, a massive, liberating wave of peace washing over me as I heard the quiet, happy sounds of Leo playing in his room. We were finally safe, the toxic storm was gone, and I had proven beyond any shadow of a doubt that nobody messes with a mother who is willing to fight for her child.